Hi, this is the second part to a much longer reaction. If you haven't seen it yet, links to it are in the description as well as the top corner of the video. Now with all that out of the way, let's continue with this then, shall we? I mean, when it comes to creativity, you can come at it from two different directions. You can obviously say, think outside the box, which this very much is. Just put a bunch of crazy people in a room and say, hey, design a plane that can travel faster than the speed of sound. Hey, design a plane that can travel faster than the speed of sound using this experimental engine. Or B, you can keep them inside the box and try and think that true creativity comes from having to work within limits.
The aircraft they would produce included the P-38, the P-80, the U-2 spy plane, the SR-71, the D-21, the F-22, the...
Wait, what was that one? Where does the pilot go in that? It looks like it's just a tube for the engine with a pair of wings stapled onto it. Supersonic reconnaissance drone? Oh, okay. Initially designed to be launched from the back of an M21 carrier aircraft. I've never heard of that before. That looks so weird.
The F-22, the F-35, the Sea Shadow, the whatever the fuck this thing is.
What?
Apparently, a fusion reactor.
Okay, so it seems that the Skunk Works have been very busy.
Because they had to save money on their electricity bill. Seriously. Go America. The general insanity of whatever comes out of Skunkworks is well known and highly revered, so if anyone was going to crack the radar problem, it was Skunkworks, and thankfully, they had been tinkering with the idea since the 1950s. Now this is where things get fucky.
Oh no. Oh no.
Skunkworks apparently doesn't have much luck in designing a stealth aircraft. The idea potentially could be possible and they have some theories, but they can't quite work it out. And then one of them discovers a scientific paper, which basically unlocks the whole thing. Now, what this paper was is a subject of some debate, and I'm going to cover that for a second because it has all the hallmarks of some major fucky wucky. The name I hear a lot is Russian scientist Peter Utsev, whose name I'm definitely saying wrong. It's the name that comes up a lot in documentaries, and it's the one mentioned by Thad Darger, a former pilot of the F-117, when he's going over the history of the plane. Coincidentally, it's also the name cited by Wikipedia. The source for that name appears to be, well, himself. The other name is Scottish physicist James Clerk Maxwell. This is the one cited by the Stealth Fighter Association, a non-profit organization that documents the history of specifically the F-117, holds reunions for its pilots, and whose board of directors includes former pilots, engineers, and maintenance personnel. So on one hand, a scientist on the USSR who published his paper in the USSR, whom Skunkworks would not have been able to see until the late 90s, long after the plane was built, as cited by a dodgy source on the Internet Encyclopedia that anyone can edit, and is famous for being wrong precisely because anyone can edit it, or the work of a Scottish mathematician who died in 1879, long before the invention of both radar and aircraft.
Yeah, I can definitely see where things are starting to get really weird.
Now, Scotland does have a long list of inventions, some of which include the telephone, the steam engine, the fax machine, the kaleidoscope, penicillin, television, cloning, the MRI scanner, refrigeration, disposable contact lenses, the ATM, the flushing toilet, vacuum flasks, fingerprinting, comic books, and the concept of time itself, but I don't honestly believe Scotland was building stealth bombers in 1879.
Oh god,
Where
no.
are they?
Scotland forever!
No, the work being cited is Maxwell's dynamic theory of electromagnetic fields, which talks about how magnetic fields travel through the air at the speed of light in waves, and the shape of those waves can mean different things. Unfortunately, he used a lot of big words that I don't understand, and I fell asleep while trying to read it, but basically the man discovered electromagnetic and radio waves. He is also considered one of the most intelligent men who ever lived, is the father of electrical engineering, special relativity, and quantum mechanics, and just for fun, one summer invented the color photograph. Albert Einstein considered him a mentor. He was
Okay.
also hilariously arrogant and didn't enjoy the company of anyone he thought was dumber than him, which, when you are the smartest man alive, is pretty much everyone. Yes, he's basically Scottish Rick Sanchez.
Oh, great.
Get in the car, Morty! Get in the car!
Don't think too hard on that one. That said, the work of Peter Imtsev cannot be discredited because of a source on Wikipedia was a bit dodgy. The man was also a genius and was born at a time where radar and planes existed.
Yeah, and I mean, you're also, Cold War, where, spies were a thing, so they might have, so that somebody might have snuck it out and then given it to Skunkworks because, they were kind of working on that.
His work specifically cites the reflection of electromagnetic waves. His work was supposedly published internationally because it was not considered by the Soviets to have any real military value.
Disregard what I just said, never mind.
Boy, were they wrong. And since realizing their mistake, Russia has thrown almost every scientific award they can think of at the man's feet, and have proudly added stealth technology to the list of Russian inventions, which I'm taking away from them because, as I'll remind you, the rule is it's who builds it first and gets it working, not comes up with the idea. So, which one of these guys should get credit for being the father of modern stealth? Well, none of them. Maxwell was a genius, but the work cited as a number of ciphers predicting how electromagnetic waves would react under certain circumstances. It was Skunkworks who deciphered them. Yevtsev was equally as brilliant, but his work was about radio wave reflections, not about stealth planes. It was Skunkworks who figured out how his theories could be applied to modern aircraft. It was Ed Martin, it was Ben Rich, it was Bill Schrodinger, it was Dennis Overhauser, as well as a number of other uncredited engineers who put it all together and figured it all out. Not anyone else. The work of Maxwell and Yevtsev may have laid the foundations, but they alone did not invent stealth aircraft. And I know that seems like a meaningless rant, but honestly, I felt like it was important to just get that out there. History can be a bit weird like this. Anyway, I'm rambling again.
I mean, you can look at that from on literally any invention almost. I mean, I'm going to start talking about steam trains again, but theoretically, the earliest version of a steam engine was made in Rome, the Roman Empire, by a guy called Hero of Alexandria. I mean, you've probably seen pictures of this before, but it was basically, a ball on top of two sticks over a boiler. You'd light a fire underneath it, it'd boil the water, steam would travel, escape the two opposing pipes, and it would cause the ball to spin. And technically speaking, that is steam doing work, so it's technically a steam engine, but would you classify this as the invention of the steam engine? No, because this was a one-off, I guess you could call it a party trick or something like that. That was then abandoned because the Romans didn't really see any, need or use of it. Yeah, it's not until hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years later, the 1700s, that you have Thomas Newcomen inventing his atmospheric steam engine, which was used to actually do stuff, specifically pump water out of mines. So you're not gonna, again, it's the whole, as LazerPig said, laid the base works and experimented with it in the very beginning, but he didn't invent it. He just sort of experimented with it until somebody later on actually did the thing for real.
So Skunkworks have got this idea that they could possibly build a plane that could go undetected by radar, solving the problem of the bomber not getting through. But Lockheed don't fund random fantasies, so onto the shelf it goes. Up until about 1975, when McDonnell Douglas thinks they've cracked it. They propose to the Pentagon that they can build a plane that is radar invisible. Now DARPA get excited. This is exactly what they've been looking for. So they propose to several companies if they can build it, then they will helicopter in a shipping container full of cash from the black budget, which means it's tax-free. Now, McDonnell Douglas eventually drop out, claiming they just couldn't design or build the required aircraft, leaving just Northrop and Lockheed in the race, and both come up with competing designs. Now, the story behind Lockheed's design is famous enough. Most people probably know it by name, and if you said Hopeless Diamond, you were wrong. In fact, the history of the project is largely incorrect. According to DARPA themselves, in this wonderfully colourful poem they wrote, "A moth disappears against the bark of the tree of which it has landed. An octopus vanishes its skin, assuming the pattern and texture of its surroundings. That stealth of an ancient and biological kind. I mean, whatever.
Yeah.
Lockheed was not actually invited to take part. DARPA were not allowed to talk to Lockheed because of their work on the SR-71, and it wasn't until much later,
okay, really?
finally granted permission by the CIA, did they learn that Lockheed had been tinkering with something and got them involved. You want to seriously drop to your knees and thank every god you know and every star you see that they did this. Because as each one of those other companies dropped out, unable to crack it, only Northrop were able to build a working stealth plane, and it looked like this.
Looking at this, I don't know whether the fact that, it's painted white and usually stealth planes are painted like, black, or the fact that it's like the way it's designed, and like little tiny nose that gets really fat for the main fuselage, and then the fuselage is almost perfectly flat all the way before it thins out towards the tail, and the wings from this angle just look so short and stubby, but that looks so stupid.
Single ugliest aircraft ever made by man. And I include in that the Fairy Garnet. The Northrop Tactic Blue, nicknamed the Whale, was originally not a bomber, but a surveillance aircraft designed to replace the U-2 spy plane. And as you might expect, it flew like a brick, attached to a cow, attached to an even bigger, angrier brick.
It was called the Whale. You couldn't have said it was a cow attached to a whale? You had the joke right there, man!
This at the helm, the advent of stealth would have been a generation of aircraft that looked like the magic school bus.
Gee, Miss Frizzle, I sure hope this is just a regular school trip.
No, cats, we're going to recon military targets in Kosovo!
I digress. The stealth whale wouldn't make it into production. Northrop would fly it every day for about 2 years as if to try and prove it could fly and had its uses, but the Army would never adopt it. It now sits at the National Museum of the United States Air Force at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base near Dayton, Ohio. Hangar 4, if you're interested. And to be fair to Northrop, the technology developed for it and the lessons learned in its use and its construction were later further developed into the B-2 Spirit, which took the concepts developed by the F-117 and ramped it up to 11.
Cool.
But getting back on topic, Lockheed have just been given the promise of a shitload of money and getting to kick their market rival Northrop in the shins. And best of all, their insane asylum disguised as an aircraft factory skunkworks was getting bored of the SR-71 and were kicking around looking for things to do. And when skunkworks gets bored, that's when you start worrying. So a new project that should take them years of pissing around time should do just the trick. What do you mean you've already built something? It took skunkworks a little over a year to produce a model. The project was called Harvey, after the
literally a year, jeez.
The 1950s film Harvey about
I forgot that was a thing.
Could see, but after
I forgot that movie was a thing. Oh god, I forgot that painting.
A long discussion and quite a lot of coffee, Lockheed were able to convince skunkworks to build a plane as opposed to a giant invisible rabbit, and thus work began. That's not actually true. According to Jack Twigg, the former project manager of the Half-Blue project, the codename Harvey was completely made up by the Pentagon. No one on the project ever referred to it as such. Though I'd already written that joke by the time I learned that, so I wasn't going to change it, because goddamn, that was funny, right? I laughed!
Shucks!
Stop judging me! In a book written by Ben Rich, who was the head of Skunkworks in 1975, no one in Lockheed even knew that DARPA was putting out contracts for stealth planes, until their in-house Soviet weapons expert literally blew the door down and told them all about it. He'd learned because
not him!
Companies DARPA had invited to compete in the contract, Fairchild and Grumman, had bowed out, but General Electric was causing a stink because they claimed they could do it with electromagnetic waves. General Electric were attempting to build a cloaking device with magnets.
Oh, okay.
Kill America. Either way, their engineers blabbed, and for some reason DARPA didn't think that the idea they were putting out contracts for stealth planes should be kept top secret. So the hobbyist community started to learn about it, and then they started coming up with ideas on what it would look like, which eventually evolved into what is widely considered to be the first ever true meme of non-credible defense, the F-19, which you can still buy models of. It's one of the best-selling models of all time.
Wait, really? Oh, okay. I mean, why wouldn't you keep your stealth plane the F-19. Oh god, it's one of these fake vehicle models. Oh, I wonder, can you still buy it? These are not the same plane. What's going on with these?
Journalists used to take models of it to the press conferences and be like, we can buy models of it, why can't you just admit that it's real? Which I completely understand. I mean, I could buy all these models of Catboys everywhere, and yet
Oh
NASA
God, Hero
still
Forge.
refuses to tell me where the portal to the Catboy dimension is, no matter how many letters I send. Why won't you tell me, NASA? What are you hiding from me? Either way, Lockheed were now in the race. And now, we finally get to the part that everybody knows after... Jesus, how long have I been rambling? Why are you subscribed to me? I am an awful YouTuber, seriously.
You've been rambling on for over 50 minutes, and this is exactly why I subscribe to you. You beautiful pig. You ramble on about these like cool little known topics that are just shrouded in like misinformation, and you cut through it like a hot knife through butter. Thank you.
Bill Schrodinger was able to sketch out a design for an aircraft that Skunkworks believed would have a low radar signature, which took advantage of something called faceting. A method, rather than absorb or nullify radar signatures, deflected them away from the return path of enemy radar, meaning that array never got a return signal, and thus should see nothing. With this sketch, they ran the design through Lockheed's computers, trying to mathematically work out the most optimal angles. This
Just trying to imagine how something like this would even fly. I mean, like, I know, like, stuff like the B-2 and other things, they had to use, like, onboard computers heavily because of the, like, because of the inherent unstableness of not having a tail. But looking at this just looks like one of those, like, oh god, what were they called? They were, like, from World War II, it was like the flying pancake or something. Just, like, would something like this even work? I mean, evidently it didn't, because they didn't build it.
was then converted into a model which was called the Hopeless Diamond. Dubbed that for the regular engineers at Lockheed hated its angular shape. They liked smooth, curved surfaces. This thing was all flat and angular and something aerodynamics. So
Stealth.
they believed that A, it wouldn't work, and B, it wouldn't fly. So they set up a big pole, put the plane on top, and fired a radar beam at it. After a bit of adjusting, they got a return on the pole, and then finally, the plane popped up on radar. It gave a weak return, roughly the size of a bird, but for some reason, the plane was appearing several feet above the pole. The eyes of every engineer slowly turned to look at the model, and there was a bird perched on top of it.
It's stuff like this that reminds you that while movies and stuff can be exceedingly silly sometimes, life can be just as silly.
The plane was completely invisible to radar. DARPA would test both designs, and though promising, Northrop's design was not completely as stealthy as advertised. At certain angles, it was detectable, and DARPA had concerns that the engineers working on the project were unexperienced on working under top-secret protocols. This was not a concern for Lockheed, whose demonstration model passed every test and was subsequently declared the winner. The project was dubbed Have Blue, and finally top-secret protocols were put in place, officially making it a black project. In 1988, it was finally revealed to the public, and thus the legend of the Nighthawk was born.
Woo!
And then the argument began.
Of course. Because we can never have nice things.
The F-117 was a bomber that, in reality, did not exactly improve on the ideology of what a bomber is. For all rights and purposes, the F-111 was vastly superior in terms of bombing capability, and the reformers would always latch on to this. World War II bombers, even the shit ones, had larger bomb capacities. The F-117 could only carry 2 bombs. It was slow, it was fuel-hungry, and it was a maintenance nightmare. It was one of the most temperamental aircrafts ever made, and it came at a cost of roughly $122 million in 1998 money, depending on which source you look at. The cost was so high because of the amount of advanced computers required to fly it. The weird angular design made it stealthy, but not exactly aerodynamic. So much so that the prototypes were known as the Wobbly Goblins. They were inhumanely difficult to fly, and it was only because of the aircraft's fly-by-wire system that it was capable of flight at all. And this idea of stealth, the reformers claimed, was just a gimmick, an expensive gimmick, and one that didn't really come with any great advantage. Look-down radar is required to be mounted high up on on another aircraft, which isn't really a problem if the enemy can't launch any because you're dominating the skies with your highly maneuverable jet fighters. And they claimed once the Soviets learned about this new stealth fighter, it wouldn't take them long to retune their radars, or develop new radar systems, or that stealth systems incorporated by Lockheed were vulnerable to certain lower frequencies and techniques used by highly powered or older generation radar systems.
And where was their proof of this? Like, at this point, this is just them lying and they're throwing stuff out. Just to, like...
In essence, it wasn't stealthy at all. And in 1999, in the skies over Serbia, the reformers would get their vindication.
Oh, this is where this video will annoy a lot of Serbians comes from. Okay. Okay, again, 55 minutes in, we're finally getting an exclamation for the description.
It's 1999. A war in Yugoslavia has been raging since February of the previous year. Now, I'm not going to get into all the nuance and politics of that war or the situation which caused its build-up. What I will say is the Wikipedia article for the Kosovo War has to be one of the longest on the site, and has a section on known mass graves.
Oh, wonderful!
Give you some clues as to why I'm maybe skipping it. It would take me several hours to explain, and people would still get mad at me in the comments. Needless to say, NATO intervenes, and a long and aggressive bombing campaign against military targets in Serbia begins. Part of this NATO deployment is a section of F-117s. Weather is bad and they are mostly flying at night. Serbian air defense is using mostly outdated and low-tech equipment. Maintenance of that equipment is expected to be very bad, and therefore not really a threat. Regular non-stealth aircraft have been flying in and out and harassing the radar stations with seed weapons, auto-seeking missiles specifically designed to home in on radar installations, so no one was expecting any problems. With the F-117s being radar invisible, they should have no issues. And that was the general feeling on the
Where
night of
does
March
every-
27th,
where does everything start going
1999,
bad?
when a squadron of 4 F-117s entered Serbian airspace. They knew the Serbian air defenses would be hunting them, but they expected almost total immunity. The black jets remained grouped until they hit the border, and then each split off, moving towards their own designated targets. And as one of those F-117s turned to home in on their designated target, something very interesting happened. The pilot spotted a missile flying towards them. There were no other planes in the air, nothing nearby. This was a radar-guided missile locking on to him. Through sheer luck, the first missile missed. The second one did not. And though the pilot bailed and was later rescued, this was the first recorded shootdown of an F-117, the first combat loss of a stealth fighter. And what had done it was nothing more than a simple, outdated radar SAM site from the 1960s operating in low-frequency mode. It was a national embarrassment. Overnight, the man who had been manning the battery, Colonel Zoltan Dani, had become a national hero. It was a massive propaganda victory for Serbia, who still celebrate it to this day. And for the reformers, it was all the proof they needed. If an older radar system could shoot down an F-117, then the whole stealth thing was really just an expensive gimmick. And that was the bottom line. Or was it?
Of course.
Okay, this may seem a bit like a diversion, but in 1966, England won the Football World Cup. Soccer, to my American audience, beating Germany 4-2. I mean, they've never won it again, but this single victory, even though it was nearly 60 years ago, even though most of the players and the people at the match have now since passed away, is as much ingrained into English culture as tea and biscuits. It's referenced almost constantly. Anytime there is a match between England and Germany, chants of 2 world wars and 1 World Cup dominate the air. It even almost made it into the national anthem. The Germans, however, find this rather surprising. I mean, not only are they completely unaware of this culture, they just don't really get what the big deal is. They don't consider 1966 to be one of their great football losses, nor do they consider England to be one of their greatest rivals. Germany has won the Football World Cup 4 times. But you see, because it's England, and England sees that one victory as an equal to that of winning the Second World War, and Germany simply doesn't care, it's meant that England is pretty much at liberty to dictate how the whole thing went down.
Okay, I'm seeing where this is going. So, of course, like, this is obviously one of those things where it's a big deal in Serbia, but in the States, it wasn't really cared about at all. At least that's why I'm going to, put it out there. But because the Serbs are the ones making all the big deal. Everyone else thinks that, oh, this was a big loss.
Produce books, films, documentaries, interview the players, that because it's such a strong point of national pride, it all has to be structured in a way that doesn't cause upset to Big Barry and the Brexit bunch, because that's your target audience. And because there is no audience for the opposite, there has never really been much opposition or critique of the facts the English present. Simply put, no one cares. And the shutdown of the F-117 over Serbia is pretty much like that. In Serbia, that one shutdown is a point of national pride beyond almost anything else. They have produced countless books and documentaries about it, they've got a museum dedicated to it, the man who did it is a national hero. And there are reasons for this. England still froths at the mouth over 1966 because England believes it is the best at football. They invented it. They are the only country which plays it correctly, even if though since 1930 they have lost 21 out of the 22 World Cups, a fact they proudly ignore because in their mind they believe that Germany is somehow, for some reason, still coping and seething at this one loss. The idea that they aren't and don't care is something many football fans in England would find deeply insulting. And with the F-117 shutdown, it kind of allows Serbia to do the same. You can't look at videos or pictures of the F-117 on the internet without a Serb in the comments reminding you that they shot one down. In their mind, they still believe that the United States of America, the most powerful military force on the planet, is still coping and seething that Serbia, little Serbia with its backwards military, was able to take down one of their most advanced fighter jets. But it also helps gloss over the realities of the Kosovo War that many people in Serbia still feel uncomfortable with. So discussions of the Kosovo War are dominated by the tale of Zoltan Dani and the night they shot down a stealth jet, and how clever the Serbs were, and how much America underestimated them over things like war crimes. And because no one else really cares, the Serbs have been allowed to get away with stating their version of the story as objective fact with little to no cross-examination. And this has been signal boosted in the US by the Reformers Club because it helped demonstrate their narrative.
Here's where, okay, so this is how it circles all the way back to the Reformers. I was wondering why we hadn't talked about them in a while. You know, I mean, on the one hand, yes, I mean, if you're fighting war, you're going to expect, you know, to lose stuff. When you don't lose equipment or have it be damaged, that's when it's the anomaly. But still, stuff like this, it does start to make me angry on the inside.
But you see, there is a bit of nuance to this whole reality. The shutdown wasn't exactly as simple as it may seem. For one, the US had been flying in and out of the same airbase every night. Unknown to them, the base was being watched. Serbian spies were held up in a house which overlooked the runway, and from their position they could see what was taking off and what was landing. That night, no other planes left the runway outside of the F-117s. They quickly passed this information along to their commanders. Furthermore, the American bombers took the same path every night, so the Serbians would know exactly which direction they would come from and roughly how long it would be before they arrived. Now knowing the skies would be clear outside of the Nighthawks, every battery in Serbia switched to low frequency mode. They knew they had no other threats to deal with. They knew they could be more active with their radars, as no Sea aircraft were operating that night, which means when the F-117 in question, ducking and weaving through hills and valleys, briefly showed up as an unidentifiable smudge on a local radar, they knew exactly what they were looking at. They knew which direction it was going, and the air defense battery nearby knew exactly where to point his radar. And well, this is the part the Reformers tend to forget. Danny flipped on his radar. Nothing. He tried again. Nothing. Twice he activated his radar and it told him nothing was there. Had Dan following standard procedure, turning his radar on for 2 sweeps meant he was now lit up like a Christmas tree. His position was compromised and most likely a Sea aircraft was on its way to deliver several hundred pounds of radar-seeking death. He now needed to move, and move quickly. But he knew the skies were clear. He knew there were no Sea aircraft, just the Nighthawks. So he turned his radar on again. And this time, he got something. By a startling coincidence, at the exact time Danny had turned his radar on, the F-117 had its bomb bay doors open, the one brief moment in that aircraft's journey where it would be visible on radar. To explain just how lucky a shot in the dark this was, the F-117 did not operate like other bombers, where you flip the switch, the doors open, and the bombs drop. The F-117 carries exactly 2 bombs, typically GBU-12 paveways. These are laser-guided bombs. The system on board the aircraft, once the target has been selected, will automatically deploy the bomb in the most optimal flight path, and then drop the bombs automatically. The trigger on the F-117 is not a trigger, so to speak. It simply gives the plane permission to fire. If that has been pressed, the doors open, the bombs drop, and the second those bombs are clear of the doors,
they close.
In some cases, those doors can be open for less than a second. The shootdown of the F-117 over Serbia was a case of extreme luck and no small part of negligence on the part of NATO. The detection of the F-117 had absolutely nothing to do with the fact the radar was operating in low frequency mode.
It had all to do that just for the split second you had a solid flat surface that the radar could bounce off of. Again, now this, I've said it a couple of times before about like these videos where they're talking about like these 1 in a million events. I want to see a movie about this, showing like what actually happened, not like one that's glorifying what the Serbs did.
But that did not stop the reformers, who even today still bang on about the follies of stealth, how old radar systems and even systems from the Second World War can detect them. You even see this when people talk about modern stealth aircraft like the F-35. Herder, my World War II radar can detect it. And because of this, and because of the propaganda around the shootdown, the system that did it, the S-125 Neva, has remained in service. It's a 60-year-old system by now. In fact, if you're a small country with some spare cash, Russia will sell you a slightly upgraded version of this exact weapon system,
of course,
as anti-stealth. Countries that still operate it include Azerbaijan, Cuba, Bulgaria, Libya, India, Moldova, North Korea, Serbia, Syria, Turkey, Kazakhstan, Venezuela, Yemen, and even Vietnam. Even the modern S-400 systems currently in use by Russia, and systems built off it like the ones used in China, still follow similar design ideologies, still follow that same principle about what stealth is weak to, and it doesn't work.
Okay, well, I will fully say the fact that I hear that this whole like tall tale is actively hurting Russia and like China in some way, militarily speaking, I'm less angry than I was before.
If America needed to invade any of these countries and stealth bombers were part of its campaign, all those countries, all those operators have been trained to immediately switch to lower frequency, and that is not something you want to do. A lower radar frequency can give you a much higher RCS return on any aircraft you might be looking at, but that comes with a significant downside. Lower frequency radar cannot penetrate cloud or rain. It can be affected by flocks of birds, waving trees, high wind, and even direct sunlight. But even if all conditions are perfect, a lower frequency radar is not just going to pick up planes, it will pick up absolutely everything, including things like radio waves, satellite televisions, phone calls, electromagnetic interference from home computers, power lines, everything like that. If you don't have a system in place to screen all that out, which typically countries still using the S-125 Neva won't have access to, or would otherwise be typically unable to afford, you're left with a man or a woman staring at a screen that has now just become alive with radar blips, trying to find the one blip on the screen that might be a plane in the brief window you have while the radar is on.
So you've just made the stealth plane even harder to find. Oh, God, I feel so sorry for these people now.
The radar the Serbs used hit the F-117 twice, and didn't see it. Even in the lower frequency, the F-117 remained invisible until it opened its bomb bay doors, and Lockheed knew that. The Hopeless Diamond model they tested had been tested in the lower frequency band, and its radar return was less than the size of a bird's eye. But because of the story, countries and militaries around the world all operate radar missile defense systems fully believing they can defend themselves against stealth technology that has never been proven proven to work. And that's why, in my opinion, the reformers have been allowed to get away with this for as long as they have. During the Cold War, it became a necessary part of psychological warfare between the Soviets and the US to overestimate what their equipment was capable of. The Soviets believed if the Americans constantly thought they were playing catch-up, it would deter them from staging an invasion, and with any luck would spend so much money trying to build up uneconomical superweapons, they would bankrupt themselves in the process, and then regular Americans living in poverty through lack of public funding would rise up in a populist revolt. This became such a big thing that overstating what their equipment can do has become part of Russian culture. They know their equipment cannot do what is advertised, but they still believe it to be part of some background psychological warfare to intimidate the Americans. And the worst part is, they believe everyone else is doing exactly the same. What they have become increasingly unaware of is when America says its equipment can do certain things, it is more likely an understatement of what it is actually capable of. But as long as Russia had the designer of the greatest fighter plane ever made coming forth to rant on Russia Today about how weak and useless Western military technology was, then the illusion would always remain in.
I was about to say something, the whole thing about, like, how can you have somebody that's so, like, delusional that they're willing to have people die for this sort of stuff. But, I mean, I said that earlier. I'm not going to repeat myself.
And it's all utter nonsense. The anti-stealth systems that Russia and those named countries think they have is just a regular SAM system, the same kind of system that NATO aircraft have been training to overcome for 60 years, and they've gotten very good at it. And I'd like to say that was the plan all along. I'd love to give credit to some genius, because if it was planned, then this would have been the greatest psyops the world has ever seen.
Oh god, if this was done intentionally.
This is just how humans work. Military advisors are 10 a penny, quite literally in some cases. Everyone even remotely connected to the military in some regard thinks they know a thing or two, puts on a shirt and tie, and starts calling themselves an advisor. And it's great to have a few military advisors surround you. It gives you credibility, gives you comfort, especially when they rattle off their expertise about where they served and who with, and all the stuff they did, etc, etc. But the vast majority of these guys don't know a damn thing. Typically, their knowledge is based on limited personal experience, which comes from brief snapshots of a single military operation, with no real knowledge to the overall big picture, which many regard with a certain level of disdain. They can anecdote a bunch of stuff, sure, they can relate everything back to a story that happened to some guys some time ago, they can even identify all the guns and tanks and tell you all their history, but the reality is, half these guys come cheap because they have next to no idea what the jambaroo fuckaroo they are talking about. It's a big leap going from knowing how to strip a 50 cal to running an actual military, to go from naming all the specific parts of an Abrams to being able to predict the future movements of Ping. And the majority of the time, the actual advice they give goes over the heads of the companies they work for, with bitter few exceptions. The majority of former US colonels and NCOs who end up working as advisors are not hired because they are so brilliant or have any unique insight. It's because the company employing them wants to take advantage of their connections when bidding on government contracts. That's it. I mean, look at Ukraine. How many of these fuckers got everything wrong and still persistently make incorrect predictions, wanking on and on and on about how tanks are useless and drones are the future, without ever really knowing why drones are being so effective right now. And so it was with anti-stealth stuff. They knew this one example where one got shot down by this specific system, knew it had something to do with low-frequency radar, put two and two together, and got 7. They knew the surface
2 and 2 and got 7,
but didn't understand the full circumstances. And as time has moved on, the F-117 has been gradually retired. Though a breakthrough in aviation and military technology, it was not exactly the greatest plane in the world. It was furiously expensive, so expensive in fact Reagan attempted to offset costs by making it a joint venture with the Brits, if they paid for it. They said no. It was a maintenance nightmare. They were costly to run, they broke down all the time. I mean, every pilot I've ever seen interviewed admitted it was rare that on long flights, everything would still be working by the time you landed, assuming it even had been when you took off. It also...
Oh, that is absolutely terrifying. I mean, again, some of these pilots are the biggest balls I've ever seen, but you have this machine that is designed to fly at supersonic speeds, be like stealthy, and the fact that you might launch and everything on it's not working at like pitch perfect. Oh, you could not pay me enough in the world to do that.
Lacked warning systems, it didn't have a radar, countermeasures, or could even fight other planes. It couldn't even go supersonic. The Air Force needed it to be more. And with the age of advanced computing, it became easier to combine faceting with more aerodynamic shapes. The F-117 was replaced by the F-22, which could go supersonic. It could fight other planes. It had a radar, it had countermeasures, it had a warning system that could tell if it was being locked onto. It was more aerodynamically sound, and it had an RCS signature even smaller than an F-117.
So just better in every way.
Itself outdated. And even yet, this is, in my opinion, still one of the most beautiful and striking planes ever made.
Oh,
It is
striking,
quite possibly
definitely.
the most groundbreaking plane ever made. And in every theater it operated in, the stealth worked. And though Serbia shot one down, the Nighthawks continued to fly almost every other night. They never shot another one down. And believe you me, they tried. And though the plane is retired, keep in mind this was built in the 1970s, and in spite of all that time that has passed, no one has been able to replicate it. Russia tried and failed. China operates a modification of one of Russia's failed prototypes and claims it's stealthy.
I gotta go back. What was that Russian one? I'm not going to question it. It's Russian. It was probably designed after like 4 bottles of vodka or something. I don't know.
Tried and failed. China operates a modification of one of Russia's failed prototypes and claims it's stealthy, but they claim a lot of things.
Of course they do, yeah.
With the P-125 and later the replica. Both would never be built, and the technology developed for them would eventually be recycled into the F-35 program. But all those prototypes did was prove the Brits got their maths right. It's a bit of a leap going from getting the math right to actually building it. The
Yeah.
Su-57 is probably the best example of that. The computer models the Russians developed are probably telling them that this should be a very stealthy aircraft, but they just lack the expertise to follow through. Animarchy is doing a feature-length video on how they fucked up and why, so I'll defer to him. But the point is, every nation has, at some point, tried, and has been trying for near enough 40 years now. China, Russia, Turkey, Japan, Britain, France, and even Sweden have all attempted, and they have all failed. They all failed to build what this one little team were able to achieve back in the 1970s. But more important than that, there is one final chapter to this aircraft.
What happens after decommissioning?
This is the F-104 Starfighter. I did say we'd get to it.
This okay.
Is one of the worst planes ever made by man. In my opinion, it's the single plane I hate the most. It was designed to offer the world a lightweight, low-technology fighter to compete against the likes of the MiG-15 and MiG-17. It was an all-weather aircraft and the first production aircraft to break Mach 2. It was built on the experience of fighter pilots in Korea and was the end result of thousands of hours of comprehensive study and development of wing and fuselage designs and testing. And as a result, it offered something no other jet in the world could. It could climb faster than any other aircraft, fly faster than any other aircraft, and fly higher than any other aircraft. And it could perform equally at both high and low altitudes. It was
Then why does it
absolute
suck so much?
breaker. But it had one major problem. Its landing speed was also its stall speed. Because of its tiny stubby wings, if the plane moved too slowly, it would simply not generate the lift required to remain airborne and would drop like a stone. Recovery in a stall was almost impossible, which
Because
led
of the
to
small
a high
wings.
rate of casualties for the pilots, as bringing this thing into land required a great deal of skill and concentration. The German Luftwaffe would suffer the highest casualty rate, losing 116 of its pilots to crashed landings. But that wasn't the worst of it. You
What?
see,
It gets
so
worse? What?
successful was this aircraft that it basically became Europe's jet fighter. And being that every European country now had a high-performance, low-cost jet fighter that could rival the very best of Soviet designs, there was no need for a lot of the European designs
Develop
that were
their
being
own.
prototyped. So things like the SR-53, a British fighter jet that was half rocket engine, or the VJ-101, a German Mach 2 capable VTOL aircraft, as well as a VTOL transport, the DO-31, were cancelled. And worst of it was that the F-104 didn't replace all of those by its own merit. While fast, it was about as maneuverable as a drunk cow behind the wheel of a Renault Twingo. It was a fairly mediocre fighter, and the US mothballed it pretty quickly. But the reason it became Europe's jet fighter of choice was that Lockheed actually managed to secure all those contracts for foreign service of the F-104 by paying huge bribes to various political officials across Europe. It was a massive scandal, and already taking a beating with the failure of the TriStar commercial jet, Lockheed were now about $2 billion in the red. They had recently been bought out by the Textron Corporation, who were in the process of selling off Lockheed's assets and had plans to strip the company down for anything valuable before writing it off as a tax break. This was around the time that Skunk Works heard about that stealth plane contract. The F-117 was a risk. It was not only the first true stealth jet, it was the jet that saved Lockheed as a company. Without it, they and Skunk Works simply wouldn't exist, and many of the projects that have come out of it in recent years probably wouldn't have existed either. And that's why, to me, this will always be my favorite plane. The Nighthawk may now only exist in museums, some still do fly to simulate enemy stealth planes and training missions, but it's kind of weird to know that this aged, outdated, and remarkably beautiful, almost piece of art has yet to be surpassed by anyone who's tried. Also because it looks sick as fuck. There, I used a modern term. Do kids still say that? Do kids still say that?
I have no idea.
No. But now I'm cool.
You were always cool. You don't need to try.
Okay, so this is just a quick post-production addendum to try and curtail some of the comments that I'm probably going to get. Now, okay, I know there's some basic stuff. This is actually called a gannet, not a garnet. I don't know why I said garnet, but, you know, I can be a bit silly sometimes. Also, I think most people would agree that the most iconic American aircraft carrier is probably the Nimitz, not the Forrestal. But, you know, whatever. I actually want to touch on this thing, the S-400 system not being able to detect the F-35 and similar stealth planes because it operates on the principle of what they think works versus what actually works. Now, every time I say literally anything on Russian technology, I get about 1 billion comments from sudden experts in Russian weapons, all of whom have very generic profiles, terrible grammar, and operate exclusively between the hours of 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. Moscow Standard Time. So to explain, the S-400 system is the missile system, not the radar. The stealth-beating radar it comes attached to is called the NEBO-M. This is 3 different radar systems that operate in conjunction with each other. The main anti-stealth one being something called long wavelength radar, which typically operates in the VHF band. Radar has different bandwidths, okay? It's I'm not going to get into it. So VHF radar, this is the Herder, my Second World War radar that the bullshit radar like to talk about. It's huge, okay? It looks like this. It's an absolutely massive array. It requires huge amounts of power, but it can detect stealth planes because things like radar absorbing material and faceting do have a limited effect on stuff like this. But here's the problem. Well, all that's fine in principle. You can say, yes, my World War II radar can detect stealth planes. What that radar cannot do is give you a clear picture of what it is it's looking at, where it is, how fast it's going, how high up it is. It cannot say, for example, provide targeting information to a missile. It can only say, yes, something is vaguely in that direction somewhere. If this is the kind of system you're going to run, you've got 3 options when it pings something. Now, the first is to fire a big missile into that vague area, which could be anything from 5 to 200 square miles, and hope that the missile's onboard targeting system sees something and locks onto it, which is not going to happen, okay?
No.
Option 2, you send a squadron of planes to go have a look and hope that they can deal with the situation when it arises. Or, you know, they're dead. So what Russia does is option 3. It sets up a bunch of other radar systems, all operating in different frequencies, and uses those to try and triangulate something that narrows down the search area, which is all done by things like Doppler radars, which have their own weaknesses, or things like the Kasta 2E, which is the radar system that Russia's hyping up as the big anti-stealth radar, it's literally just a regular radar system which operates in low frequency mode, typically in the L and X band, which...
Well, I mean... I can see the logic behind the design. I mean, if you have a radar system using multiple different radars that all have different weaknesses, you can hopefully, like, cover the weaknesses of one with another? That does seem rather overcomplicated.
again has difficulty providing targeting information to a missile system and has never been proven to work. You also have
Yeah, that's the big thing right there.
High-powered radar systems like this generate a lot of noise. They are very easy to detect. So if what you're pinging with it has anti-radiation missiles or an electronic warfare package, for example, if it's an F-35, then you can't get an accurate picture of what they are, but they now
can
know exactly where you are. And they have all the targeting data they need. That massive radar system has a couple of minutes left to live at best. You're gonna have, as soon as you ping something, once you know where it is, you gotta pack that thing up, you gotta move as fast as possible. And that ain't easy when your radar system's that size, trust me. The system...
And also, that whole thing, like, I'm gonna guess, given the fact it was so wide, I didn't see whether if it turned or not, or if it was just one of those big static things that just sat there and blasted out radar. But I would think that the way it works is it collapses in on itself and then it folds down onto the truck. But yeah, you wouldn't want to do that too quickly because the little radar, I don't actually know what they'd be called, the little things on the arms that collapse in, they look, you don't want to do it too hard, otherwise they might break.
Works in principle, but the reality might be a little bit different.
Of course.
Russia has never faced stealth jets. It has never built a working stealth jet to test these systems on. It has never been able to prove that such a system works. And given Russia's track record on its claims of military prowess, I'd be hard pushed to believe anything they say.
Yeah.
That said, there is no such thing as perfect stealth. Irregular radar systems will detect a stealth plane within a certain range. That's just inevitable, okay? But that range is typically very short, a lot shorter than what most people think. And this means there can be hidden gaps in enemy air defenses. Modern assessments have estimated, based on information the US has about the S-400 system, because it has allies which do operate it and do know what it's capable of, have said you could get a target lock on an F-35 if the aircraft is flying within 20 miles of the radar, and the pilot is the biggest dumbass on the planet, is ignoring all the warnings that the plane is giving off that it's being spotted by a radar system, which is something that even older generations of planes could do. 20 miles may seem a lot, but you need to understand the Russians claim the S-400 can detect stealth planes within 200 miles. So there's a bit of a discrepancy there. But stealth is less about not being detected and more about delaying that detection long enough that you can perform your mission and then get the hell out of there before the enemy can react to it. One thing about the F-117 shootdown that the Serbs tend to forget about is that the F-117 in question had already destroyed its target, which was a command post. So even though the Nighthawk was shot down, the shootdown didn't really achieve anything. I mean, the target was still hit and was destroyed. Anyway, I think that's everything, but feel free to whine at me in the comments because I'm sure I've probably missed something. And you know what it's like.
You missed out the thing you didn't talk about. Something.
It can be annoying.
The soya boy.
Whatever. Like, I'm sorry this took so long to get out. Happy New Year, I guess. Thanks for watching. Bye.
I mean, out of that whole thing, I have to say that my absolute favorite, like, part of that was the fact that, yes, given, like, this whole, like, range of circumstances, given this exact, very precise set of circumstances, one of them was able to be shot down. But as a result, that whole thing might be unintentionally, hampering America's enemies to like attack modern stealth planes and like in their totality. I mean, oh god, that I absolutely love that. Oh, I love the irony of that. It's like, hey, this thing worked once, so we're just gonna keep doing it forever. Yeah, so that was the first LazerPig video of the year, and oh, I have been waiting for a new LazerPig video so long, and it was definitely not a disappointment. So yeah, of course. As always, original video is linked in the description if you haven't seen it for some reason. If you're watching a reaction before the original video, what are you doing? Corner video will lead to both my Let's Play of the day and all of the other parts of this reaction, because I'm looking at this, and right now I have over 2 hours of raw footage that I'm going to have to edit down, and I have a feeling it's going to be more than just 2 parts. With all that out of the way, I hope you guys liked. If you did, leave a like, subscribe if you have not, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.
I've been allowed into the Tank Museum for reasons I'm sure they are now currently regretting to talk about tanks. I am a self-proclaimed historian. I am a self-proclaimed expert on tanks. I know everything because of that. And if you disagree, I'm here, you're not.